This submitted material explores the complex dynamics of betrayal, contrasting the desperate lyrical pleas of an unfaithful partner with a grounded psychological analysis of how broken trust demands deep self-reflection for future redemption.
The stark contrast between the lyrical emotional pleas and the clinical psychological analysis creates a disjointed reading experience.
Yeah, we're diving straight into the structural mechanics here right away.
Absolutely.
Because the front half of this piece, it relies entirely on the emotional defense of, simply being human.
Right. It really leans into that.
Like the narrator states, "I'm only human, of flesh and blood I'm made," and insists that they just needed someone to hold me, to fill the void. It paints the transgression as this, almost like a biological inevitability.
Exact. And the weakness in the current draft is that the second section, the prose analysis, explicitly rejects this premise without actually addressing it. The analysis states unequivocally that betrayal is an active choice that shatters the foundation of a relationship, pointing out that temporary loneliness does not justify breaking.
Right, so we are presented with two completely isolated philosophies here.
Yes, exact. On page 1, we have the romanticization of human error. And then on page 2, we have the strict accountability of psychological growth.
And they're just like sitting next to each other.
Sitting next to each other without a conversational bridge, the reader is essentially left to do all the heavy lifting of connecting the raw emotional excuses with the analytical aftermath.
Well, I kind of want to push back on the idea that this is necessarily a weakness, though.
Oh, okay.
Like, what if the author intended for the transition to be harsh? Betrayal itself is a violently jarring experience, right?
It is, yeah.
So couldn't this structural whiplash be a deliberate artistic choice? To mirror the shock of discovering an affair?
I see where you're going with that.
The reader is, lured into this empathetic, poetic mindset, and then bam, they're hit with cold, clinical reality.
That is a valid artistic instinct for sure, but there is a profound difference between a jarring narrative beat and an abandoned narrative thread.
Okay, fair point.
If an author wants to simulate shock, they do it through pacing and revelation, not by dropping the established emotional continuity entirely.
Right. You can't just drop the thread.
Exact. When a reader is immersed in lyrical text, they are engaging the empathetic, associative parts of their brain. Suddenly throwing them into a text without a transition doesn't simulate the shock of betrayal.
It just creates cognitive dissonance.
It does. It forces the reader into the role of a translator between two warring halves of a text.
So the burden of translation is being unfairly placed on the audience.
Precisely. Which brings us to the suggestion for improvement. Actively weave the psychological insights into the lyrical narrative to show how the human mistake directly transitions into the shattered foundation of trust.
Okay.
The analysis must interrogate the poetry.
So give me the mechanics of that. How does the author practically weave a sterile psychological breakdown into an emotionally volatile poem without, ruining the tone of both?
We can look at a few concrete examples of how to do this. First, the author could introduce a bridging paragraph that explicitly dissects the lyrical phrase, "born to make mistakes."
Oh, I like that.
You take that emotional plea, place it on the operating table, and hold it up against the second section's argument.
Right.
The prose needs to acknowledge the intense feeling of inevitability the betrayer feels, validating the emotion, but then immediately pivot to the clinical reality that betrayal is an active series of microchoices.
Wow, so you literally use the prose to dismantle the poetry's defense.
Exactly.
I see. It's almost like putting the lyrical section on the witness stand and having the clinical section cross-examine it.
That is a perfect way to visualize. Yeah, a second concrete example would be to format the piece as a conceptual dialogue.
Okay.
The clinical voice could respond directly to the lyrical excuses, line by line. When the lyrical voice cries, "I just needed someone to hold me," the clinical voice counters with the prose's assertion that loneliness does not repair a bond. It adds new pain.
I have to stop you there. A literal dialogue?
Yeah.
Doesn't that risk feeling incredibly gimmicky? Like a contrived script rather than a cohesive essay?
It absolutely risks being gimmicky if the voices sound like two strangers arguing at a bus.
Yeah, exactly.
But it works if you frame it as an internal friction. It's the heart's desperation battling the mind's demand for accountability within the same individual.
Oh, I get it now.
It transforms the disjointedness from a structural flaw into a deliberate debate. The psychological tension is what keeps the reader anchored.
But let's assume they execute that dialogue flawlessly. They put the lyrical excuses on the witness stand, they cross-examine the poetry, and they bridge the gap. It still fails to give the reader a complete picture because the clinical side of the argument is prosecuting the wrong crime.
How so?
They are missing half the facts. which leads us into the narrative dynamics.
The unexpected revelation of mutual betrayal in the lyrical interlude introduces a profound complexity that the subsequent psychological analysis completely overlooks.
Yes, let's isolate the specific moment in the source material where this happens. Right in the middle of the lyrical section, the perspective shifts.
Right, it's a huge shift.
And the partner responds with, "The tears I cry aren't tears of pain. They're all to hide my guilt and shame."
It's quite the reveal.
And then comes the devastating follow-up. "I forgive you, now I ask the same of you. While we were apart, I was human too." The revelation is that they were both unfaithful.
Both of them. And the weakness is glaring once you cross over into the prose.
Completely glaring.
The analytical section exclusively analyzes unilateral betrayal. It operates entirely on a standard victim and perpetrator model.
Yeah, it really does.
It spends pages discussing how the offending partner must learn boundaries and how the victim loses their sense of safety. By ignoring the mutual guilt established just paragraphs earlier, the analysis misses a crucial opportunity.
A huge opportunity to explore the messy, dual-fault reality of this specific dynamic.
Exactly.
It's like analyzing a car crash by only inspecting one driver's brakes, when we've just been explicitly told both drivers were speeding blindfolded.
That is a great analogy.
The analytical section needs to account for both drivers. The psychological text states that a relationship is tested in the hard times, when you feel alone or frustrated, but it assumes only one person failed the test.
Right, exactly.
The reader feels cheated because the text sets up a massive narrative twist, mutual infidelity, and then the clinical analysis suffers from a sudden bout of amnesia.
And that amnesia undermines the credibility of the entire psychological framework.
Definitely.
If a framework can't account for the facts established in its own text, why should the reader trust its conclusion? The suggestion here is to expand the psychological analysis to address how trust and redemption are navigated when both parties have committed the ultimate breach of trust.
But how do they do that without tearing down the existing psychological framework? I mean, does the author have to write an entirely new essay to cover dual fault mechanics?
Not at all. It requires shifting the lens, not doubling the word count.
Okay, give me an example.
For a concrete example, the author could add a targeted subsection exploring how mutual betrayal shifts the dynamic from a standard victim-perpetrator model to a shared crisis of boundaries.
A shared crisis of boundaries.
Right. The analysis needs to define what accountability looks like when you cannot point the finger at the other person.
Unpack that concept of a shared crisis of boundaries for me. What does that actually look like on the page?
Well, when one person cheats, the boundary of the relationship is breached. The psychological advice usually focuses on the perpetrator building a wall to prove they are safe, and the victim learning to trust that wall.
Right, the standard advice.
But when both people cheat, the boundary doesn't exist anymore. There is no wall, and neither person has the moral high ground.
Wow, yeah.
The analysis needs to stop telling the victim how to feel safe and start explaining how two people standing in a collapsed house begin to clear the rubble together.
That fundamentally changes the tone of the clinical section, doesn't it? From prescriptive to diagnostic.
Yes, it really does. And that leads to a second concrete example. Analyze the lyrical partner's line, "I forgive you, now I ask the same of you," through the lens of the prose's assertion that true intimacy requires uncomfortable honesty. Use the prose to evaluate if this mutual forgiveness is genuine healing or just mutual evasion of responsibility.
Mutual evasion of responsibility. So, wait, they aren't forgiving each other because they understand the weight of the betrayal.
No.
They are trading pardons, so neither of them has to face the music.
Exactly. The human brain naturally seeks the path of least resistance when faced with guilt. I forgive you, so you are forced to forgive me.
That's fascinating.
By analyzing this specific psychological maneuver, the author forces the clinical section to engage with the darkest, most cynical implications of the lyrical section.
Are they just enabling each other's bad behavior under the guise of being human?
Right, exactly.
So if they unpack this mutual evasion, if they realize these two characters might just be trading pardons to avoid accountability, where does that actually leave them?
That is the big question.
Because when we look at the ending of this material, the clinical analysis doesn't even try to fix the current couple.
The forward-looking advice lacks a tangible connection to the immediate relationship crisis depicted in the open.
Let's map out the ending as it stands right now. The prose concludes by stating that a breakup resulting from betrayal doesn't mean a person is finished.
Right.
It pivots to emphasizing that in the next relationship, there is an opportunity to choose differently, to be more aware of emotions and to build intimacy on honesty. It becomes a guide to making better choices with a hypothetical future partner.
And the weakness here is a massive emotional disconnect between the setup and the payoff.
Yeah, massive.
The entire lyrical section is a desperate, real-time plea to save the current relationship. The narrator is begging, "Please forgive me," and declaring, "Nothing could change the way I feel." The emotional stakes are entirely rooted in the survival of this specific bond, but the analytical conclusion abandons those immediate stakes, abruptly skipping ahead to hypotheticals about their next partners.
It feels like reading a medical chart where the patient is actively bleeding out on the table and the doctor is calmly lecturing the room about how to avoid paper cuts in the future.
Yes, that's exactly how it feels.
It really is. The reader feels abandoned. The author essentially uses emotional escapism, fleeing the messy, complicated reality of the current couple to safely philosophize about a hypothetical future couple that doesn't have any baggage yet.
Let me play devil's advocate here for a second, though.
Sure.
Isn't the point of a psychological analysis to offer a universal takeaway? If the author just focuses on fixing this one specific, deeply flawed couple, doesn't the piece lose its broader utility?
You mean for a reader trying to learn from it?
Yeah, for a reader who might be trying to learn how to avoid these mistakes in their own future. Well, universality has to be earned through the specific case study.
Oh, that's a good point.
If a professor can't solve the specific math equation they just wrote on the chalkboard, the class isn't going to trust their universal formulas for the homework.
Right.
You cannot claim to have the psychological tools to build a healthy future relationship if you refuse to apply those tools to the broken relationship currently sitting in front of you.
I see.
The suggestion is to recalibrate the conclusion to first address the viability of the current relationship before pivoting to future abstract connections.
Ground the advice in the reality of the characters we've been following.
Yes, and as for concrete examples of how to execute this, first, apply the prose's rules for rebuilding directly to the specific couple in the lyrics.
Okay.
The prose talks about setting strict boundaries and engaging in profound honesty. So, evaluate if their mutual "I'm only human" apologies actually meet that threshold.
Test them against the rules.
Exactly. Take the psychological framework and test the couple against it. Do they have what it takes to survive their own mutual betrayal?
Using the clinical analysis as a diagnostic tool for the couple we actually care about.
And a second concrete example. Conclude by explicitly arguing whether the lyrical couple should stay together based on the framework provided.
Give a definitive answer.
Use their own words as evidence. When they say, "I just needed someone to hold me to fill the void," does the psychological framework suggest they are capable of true intimacy?
Probably not.
Right, or does it suggest they are simply seeking temporary comfort, practically guaranteeing they will hurt each other again?
Yeah.
By making a definitive clinical judgment on their current relationship, the piece earns the right to then pivot and say, and if they do walk away from each other, here is how they must approach the next person.
It brings everything full circle. We've uncovered a really specific roadmap for this material today.
We really have.
The core of this critique is about integration and accountability. First, we identify the need to bridge the disjointed philosophies between the lyrical excuses and the clinical reality, so the reader isn't forced to navigate a conceptual chasm.
Right.
Second, we address the ignored mutual betrayal from the interlude. The analysis absolutely must account for a dual-fault relationship rather than leaning on a simplistic victim model.
Crucial point.
And finally, we discuss connecting the forward-looking advice back to the immediate crisis of the couple, giving the reader closure on the present before moving to the future.
To summarize the actionable steps for the listener to implement, actively weave the clinical analysis as a counter-argument to the lyrical excuses to eliminate cognitive dissonance. Expand the prose to account for dual-fault relationship dynamics, specifically analyzing the mechanics of mutual evasion of responsibility.
Yeah.
And finally, apply the rules of future redemption directly to the present couple's attempt at reconciliation, delivering a definitive judgment on their viability before offering universal advice.
We invite the listener to revise their material based on these notes and submit it back and again for further feedback.
We love to read it.
Remember, when we look at a collapsed building, we expect the engineering report to examine both the faulty foundation and the earthquake that shook it. If we want to understand why the structure failed, we can't just measure the tremor. We have to understand exactly how that tremor found the flaw in the steel.